My name is Amelia. My childhood was spent in a small, cozy house that always had a smell of fresh bread. My dad ran our family bakery, which he took over from his parents. After school, I had a great time helping him knead the dough, feeling the soft texture under my hands while working together. However, my mother was quite different. Her job was as a realtor, and she always wore sharp suits and high heels. She made more money than my dad, and that often caused tension in our home. During an evening when I was 11, I heard my mother calling from the kitchen. "Amelia, please set the table," she yelled. Back then, I was a skinny, shy girl who was more interested in reading books than anything else. I marked my spot in the book I was reading and dashed to the kitchen. As I set the table, I couldn't help but overhear my parents arguing again. "It's been another slow month, Taylor," my mother said, her voice full of frustration. "When are you going to pull yourself together?" My usually calm father replied calmly, "Please, Joyce." Not in front of Amelia. But Mom didn't care. I froze and clutched the edge of the table, trying not to scream as she stated, "She ought to realize what a failure her father is." This type of debate was common in our household. Mom often teased Dad, who always tried to keep the peace. There were other factors besides money. Mom felt stuck in an unfulfilling life. "Amelia." Mom's sharp voice cut through my thoughts. "Where's my wine?" I rushed to pour her a drink, my hands quivering, and spilled some on the tablecloth. Mom narrowed her eyes and frowned at me. "You're a girl with no value. Are you unable to accomplish anything correctly?" Dad stepped in immediately. "It's just a little wine, Joyce." Not important. But his mother was mad at him. "You are too forgiving of her. She's becoming as pathetic as you, which is not surprising." That was too much for me. My tears are running out of control. I ran to my room with my head buried under my pillow. I loved my dad, but I didn't understand why he put up with the way his mother treated him. My only hope of survival in our house was to be quiet and invisible. The next morning, something slipped off. The smell of freshly made bread from the bakery was gone, as was the sound of Mom's heels clicking on the floor. I came downstairs to find Dad sitting at the kitchen table looking pale and desolate. "Where are you, Mom?" I asked, though I was already uncomfortable. Without saying a word, Dad gave me a note written in Mom's handwriting. I was leaving with Anthony when it said, "I can't do this anymore, Tyler. He can give me the life I want. None of this small-town nonsense interests me. Amelia, don't waste your time looking for me. All you are is worthless. Tyler, you have made our daughter a loser, and you are a loser. Goodbye and farewell." I stared at the note and felt like I had been punched in the gut. Mom was gone. She had left us, calling Dad a loser and me useless. The months that followed were challenging and hectic. Dad filed for divorce and requested that Mom's parental rights be withdrawn. I remember sitting with him in a cold courtroom and holding his sweaty hand while we waited for Mom to come. She didn't. The grown-ups in the courtroom talked about things like desertion and inappropriate parenting. In the end, the judge ruled in Dad's favor. Dad gave me a small hold of my hand after it was done and muttered, "It's done, Amelia. The divorce is formally finalized and your mother's parental rights are terminated. It's just the two of us now." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. Life wasn't straightforward after that. Dad worked long hours and gave his all at the bakery. By the age of 13, I had taken up most of the household chores. I would prepare dinner, do the laundry, and finish my homework after school. Despite not having the life I wanted, we made it work. 2 years later, when I was 15, everything changed again. One evening, Dad came home looking astonished and sad. "Uncle Ryan passed away," he whispered as he sank into a chair. I hugged him tightly. "I'm so sorry, Dad." After a moment, his eyes widened in surprise, and he pulled back. "Amelia, you won't believe this. He left me everything. Almost 700,000. I am his sole relative. I don't even know what to do with it all, but Dad worked it out soon. He put some of the money into the bakery. He gave the business a new, modern look, upgraded the equipment, and added more items to the menu. Our little bakery became well known in just a few months. People loved the new environment and our selection of treats. Dad hired more workers, extended the hours, and soon had a second store across town. As our once struggling bakery turned into a thriving business, there was hope for the first time in years. My life had changed significantly from what it had been as a child by the time I was 16. With my dad now owning 3 successful bakeries, money was no longer an issue for us. For the first time, we felt secure and stable. I quit my part-time work after school since my dad strongly encouraged me to concentrate on my studies. Life was easier today, but it was also more joyful. Our first real vacation was a 3-week trip to Europe. My mother slowly disappeared from my memory. Dad started dating occasionally, but he never seemed to be committed to anyone. He never remarried me. We were pleased just the way we were. Our family of 2 was adequate. High school graduation was accompanied by a frenzy of celebrations. I can still remember the day we tossed our caps into the air and embraced our friends. Because of my hard work, I was accepted to State University, where I planned to study finance. The morning I was preparing to leave for college, Dad gave me a small package. "What is this?" I was curious. "Open it," he said, smiling. Inside, I found a key. I looked up at him, confused. "What's this for?" "It was your graduation present," he explained. "It's an apartment near the college. You won't have to worry about living in dorms or paying rent." I stared at him in shock. "Dad, I can't handle this. It's too much." He waved and rejected my complaints. "You've earned it, Amelia. Now go and honor me." College seemed to pass by quickly. I was determined to make the most of the opportunity Dad had given me, so I worked very hard in my studies. While I was at school or immersed in textbooks, I worked as an intern at local financial firms to obtain real-world experience. By the time I graduated, I had a job lined up as a junior financial analyst. On my first day of work, I was standing in front of the mirror in my apartment, smoothing my blazer. "You can do this, Amelia." I addressed my reflection. "Make your dad proud." The task was challenging, but I enjoyed it. I used every bonus and raise I earned as a direct result of my diligence to save money or making investments. I was still thinking about Dad's advice. "Money makes money," Amelia said. "Make wise use of it." By the time I turned 33, my assets had grown significantly over the years. I had 3 other apartments in addition to the one I lived in, and the rental money provided a solid safety net. Life was good, steady, prosperous, and peaceful. But one phone call changed everything. "Amelia," Dad's voice came over the telephone, strained and somber. "Are you able to come over? I have to talk to you." Worry turned my stomach as I rushed to his apartment. When I arrived, he was seated at the kitchen table and appeared older and more seasoned than I had ever seen him. "What's wrong, Dad?" I asked in a tremulous voice. He took a deep breath. "It's cancer, honey. Stage 4 of the pancreas." It seemed like the globe was tipping toward me. "No," I mumbled and shook my head. "This has to be a mistake." But it wasn't. The most challenging year of my life was the one that followed. We went through countless doctor's appointments, treatments, and highs and lows. I spent every free moment trying to make Dad as comfortable as I could, whether he was at home or in the hospital. I made his favorite cheese soup, albeit there were days when he was too sick to eat it. It was a cool autumn day, and he was sitting in his favorite recliner, looking serious. "We need to talk, Amelia," he murmured, patting the seat next to him. I sat down, already afraid of his words. I was graciously told by the doctor that I had around 5 months to live. "No," I replied, tears in my eyes. "They're wrong. There will be a second opinion." "It's okay, Amelia." He reached for my hand and whispered, "I've accepted it, but I still need to do something. When I sell the bakery, you will get everything." All of your needs will be met. I wiped away my tears and pulled my fingers away. I don't care about your money, Dad. I want you. His smile was tender and heartbroken. My dear, I get it. But even if I'm not there, I'll care for you like this. The following 6 months were filled with many bittersweet occasions. We talked about everything and nothing more. I memorized everything I knew about him. His laugh, the furrows on his cheeks, the faint smell of sugar and wheat that followed him everywhere. Then one quiet Sunday morning he was gone. The funeral was packed with goodbyes and tears. Then I sat alone in his empty house, clinging to his cherished apron like a lifeline. The lawyer has already given the documents. As he had promised, Dad left everything to me. I used the money I made from the bakeries to buy 3 more apartments. It felt right, as though I were continuing his tradition and making something enduring. A year after Dad's death, I began to get my bearings. My employment kept me busy, and maintaining my rental properties gave me a sense of purpose. I thought I was getting used to a new normal. Then I got a second call that flipped my life upside down. A voice that sounded familiar stated, "It's your mother, Amelia. When I come back to town, I'd like to see you, if that's okay." My mind was racing. There was a part of me that wanted to cut the call short and let the woman who had left us go. But I was captivated by the part of me that still remembered the little girl who had loved her mother. After a long time of hesitation, I said, "Okay." When I agreed to see my mother, I wasn't sure how I felt. At the same time, I was interested and anxious. I arrived early the next day, but I persisted in saying, "Let's meet tomorrow at noon at Don Jose's Mexican restaurant." My stomach was in knots while I waited at the table. At exactly noon, I watched her walk in. Even at her advanced age, she was, as I recall, elegant. She wasn't alone, though. Behind her stood a young girl, maybe 17 years old. When Mom saw me, she rushed over. Her face lit up. "Amelia, my dear," she said, "you look amazing," and gave me a quick hug. Then she gestured to the girl. "This is Abigail, your sister." Her words were like a ton of bricks to me. My sister? I stared at Abigail, trying to process this shocking insight. She looked down at her hands and was uncomfortable. We sat down, and Mom began to review everything. She told me how her partner, Anthony, had left her shortly after Abigail was born. She talked about how difficult life had been, how she had struggled financially, and how she finally decided to start again by going back to her hometown. Her tone changed to one of hope after a pause. She said carefully, "I heard you have rental properties." Her voice trailed off, but I could understand her well. I was wondering if, maybe... I looked at Abigail. She kept her head out of her eyes. She seemed shy and nervous, and I felt sorry for her. I thought back to how my father taught me the importance of kindness, particularly when faced with hardship. I also recalled my childhood fear and wished my mother had come back. Finally, I could hear myself say, "All right, I just got an apartment. You can stay there if you want." Mother's face lit up with relief. "Thank you. We are going to pay the rent." "Of course." I raised my hand to stop her. "No rent," I said. "Just take care of the utilities for now." I couldn't help but give Abigail another glance while we worked out the details. She looked so young and inappropriate. I was her age when Mom left, and I remember feeling lost and alone. I tried to ease the tension by asking, "So, Abigail, are you a junior in high school?" She nodded, then glanced up at me. "Yes, it is unusual to begin the senior year at a different school. Listen, I'm here if you ever need someone to talk to or help with school," I said, feeling another wave of sympathy. "I bet it is." Abigail gave me a small smile. "Warm regards." "That's important." As we left the restaurant, Mom embraced me once again. "You are an angel, Amelia. I know I have a lot to make up for, but I hope we can start afresh." I nodded, unsure of my capacity to speak. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was about to grow much more complicated. For better or worse, my mom was back, and I had a sister. Only time would tell us what that meant for all of us. After Mom and Abigail returned, the months that followed were strange. Mom quickly found work as a realtor and went back to her former life as if she had never gone. Abigail went to the local high school to finish her last year. I stayed away because I wasn't sure how to deal with this new family dynamic. Sometimes Mom would visit or phone. "Thank you again for the apartment, Amelia, darling. What a blessing you have been," she would say with a cheerful smile. Her endless gratitude made me uncomfortable. "It's all right, Mom." I would make an effort to keep the conversations short and reply, "I'm glad I could help." But I started to get to know Abigail as a careful friend. We would talk about her college aspirations, or she would ask for help with her math homework. Having a sibling was somewhat wonderful. But the weight of all the years we had lost continued to stand in our way. Then came Abigail's graduation day. From the rear of the auditorium, I observed her accepting her degree. I thought for a moment about what may have happened if Mom had been with us all the time when I saw her beaming proudly. The very next day, Mom knocked on my door without warning. Her face was heated, and her eyes were blazing with anger. I followed her in confusion as she pushed me into the living room and said, "We need to talk." "What's going on?" She looked over at me. "Don't be stupid. I know about the apartments, Amelia. All 4 of them." I was feeling nauseous. "What about them?" I posed the question calmly. Then she shouted, "You've been keeping this from us." While they were enjoying life to the fullest, Abigail and I were just scraping by. I got annoyed. "I apologize. You can have one of those flats for free." "Isn't that enough?" She spat out. "It's not. Half of those properties should be mine. I am your mother." It was impossible for me not to chuckle. It was completely ridiculous. "You can't be serious," I said. "You gave up any claim to my life and belongings when you left us, didn't you? Absence of parental rights. No child support." She suddenly lowered her voice and pleaded, "Please, Amelia. Think about Abigail. She needs money for college. If you sold just one apartment." "No." I instantly stopped talking. I cut her off before she could say anything further. "I am not in charge of Abigail's education." Mom's cheeks flushed, and she became enraged. "How could you have been so egotistical?" She cried out. "After everything I've done for you, it was the final straw." I stared at her in disbelief. "For me, what have you done?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "Do you mean that I was left behind when I was a kid? Did you refer to me as useless in your parting note? Or do you want more after living in my apartment for months without paying rent?" Mom flinched as though I had slapped her. She stood still for a while, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Without another word, she pivoted on her heel and dashed out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there shaking, enraged, and hurt at the same time. Was she able to? Given everything I had endured as a result of her, how could she attempt to guilt me in this manner? I slid into the couch and covered my face with my hands. Though I knew deep down that letting her back into my life was dangerous, I had hoped. The truth is, I didn't know what I had hoped for. My anger faded and was replaced with a deep sorrow. She was merely a stranger, even though she was supposed to be my mother, my protector, and my rock. A stranger who appeared to be only interested in exploiting me. How about Abigail? What about her? As a young adolescent, she was caught up in all of this. I didn't know how to deal with her. When I was waiting for my order at my usual coffee shop 3 weeks later, I noticed that the barista was giving me a strange look. I didn't think much about it until I overheard a quick conversation from a nearby table. "Isn't that absurd? She's charging her mother's rent for all those apartments." I became icy. Were they talking about me? Over the next several days, I noticed more muttering and more side eyes. It seems that Mom had been occupied with sharing her twisted version of events with everyone who would listen. The message was then followed on Twitter. During my lunch break, I noticed my sandwich and almost choked on it. It read, "My daughter Amelia makes a fortune by renting out 5 apartments, but she won't assist her sister with her college education. She's forcing me to pay outrageous rent, and I'm barely making ends meet. It pains me that my child might be so greedy and egotistical." Every one of the hurtful comments was like a blade to my heart. How could she do such a thing to her mother? What a horrible person. Unappreciative brats. The pattern was followed by friends, relatives, and even old classmates I hadn't spoken to in a while. No one seemed to realize she was my mother who abandoned me as a child. Just when I thought things couldn't get much worse, my boss called me into his office. Then he replied gravely, "Amelia, we have to talk to your mother about this. The company's reputation is starting to deteriorate." I felt the blood on my face begin to drain. "I can clarify, sir." He held up a hand to halt me. "I need this fixed quickly and discreetly, but I don't need details. This kind of turmoil has nothing to do with our business. Do you understand?" I bowed my head, my throat too tight to talk. When I returned to my computer, I saw an email alert about the unpaid utilities at Mom's apartment. Of course. With shaky palms, I dialed her. "What are you trying to find?" She snapped as she picked it up. Trying not to lose my cool, I took a deep breath. "Mom, the utility bills for your apartment are past due. Do you recall how we decided you would handle those?" She chuckled. "Oh, please. You make so much money from those apartments that you can afford a couple of bills." "That's not the point," I said, growing impatient. "We agreed. Agreement. Agreement. Such as the pledge to support your family?" She shouted back, her voice cold. "How did that benefit us?" As I sat there holding the phone, I felt as though everything was crumbling around me. This was my reward for trying to be kind and giving. I made plans to see a depressed lawyer. Miss Sophia, a calm and capable attorney, reviewed my case. "You've given your mother plenty of notice, and she doesn't have a lease or pay rent," she replied. "You have every right to evict your mother." I nodded, simultaneously relieved and guilty. "What do I have to do?" She slipped a document across the desk toward me. "This is an official eviction notice. Give it to her." I stared at the paper for a long time before I picked it up. It felt heavy in my hands because of what it represented, not its weight. I spent years trying to start afresh after Mom left. Letting her back in had been wrong, but this time I was in control. It was time to move on, even if it meant losing the mother I had always dreamed she would be. The lawyer had made it clear that if she didn't comply, we could take legal action. When I got the eviction notice, I drove to Mom's apartment, which was my apartment. My hands trembled as I knocked on the door. As she opened it, Mom's expression twisted into a frustrated pout. "Oh, it's you. Have you decided against selling Abigail's college apartment?" she asked. "Abigail has already selected her school, and tuition is due the following month." My surprise quickly gave way to anger at her arrogance. "Are you serious? After everything you've done, you're still making demands?" She waved her hand dismissively and added, "Don't be so dramatic. It's the least you can do for your family." It was the decisive moment. Without a word, I handed her the eviction notice. "You have 30 days to leave this place." Mom's face went white as she glanced at the paper. Then she exploded. "You ungrateful little brat." Her voice echoed off the walls as she screamed, "I refuse to back down despite everything I've done for you." The conclusion, "What did you do?" My hands were shaking, but I talked calmly. "Do you mean that I was abandoned when I was 12 years old? Lying about me to everybody who will listen? Or maybe you're talking about living in my apartment without paying any rent or even the utilities." Her face was flushed with anger before she leaped forward and grabbed my shirt. As she spat, she said in a toxic voice, "You're nothing. Can you hear me? Just a selfish, cold-hearted individual." I tripped myself free and staggered back. "That's it," I said, grabbing my phone. "I'm gonna call the police." Her eyes widened, but she kept screaming. Every syllable she spoke grew more vicious than the last. When the police arrived, I was sobbing uncontrollably and trembling. I thoroughly explained the situation and showed them the eviction letter. One police officer glanced at Mom. "Mom," he said firmly, "I suggest you calm down and discuss this with your daughter in a courteous manner." Mom laughed. "With her, in a polite way? She intends to leave us on the streets." I had a conversation with the other cop. "Legally, this is a civil case, Miss Sophia. We can't take her away by force without a court order. You will have to take this to court if necessary." I nodded in defeat as they left. I was angry at Mom's haughty expression. "You won't do it," she scoffed, crossing her arms. "You don't have the guts to accompany your mother to court." My anger turned to resolve as I stared at her. I said, "Watch me steadily." Before she could respond, I turned and walked away. When I got to my car, I heard the door slam behind me. At last, the day of the court hearing came. I felt nauseous as I walked inside the courtroom. Mom and Abigail were already there. Mom's eyes were red and swollen, and Abigail seemed to want to disappear. Mom produced a strong performance when the hearing began. Your Honor wiped her eyes with a tissue as she sobbed. "My daughter has lost any compassion. She's trying to leave her mother and sister behind after everything I've done for her." I forced myself to be calm by balling my fists under the table. Then, with a firm and confident voice, my lawyer sprang to his feet. "Your Honor, I would want to present you with some evidence that presents a very different image." He laid out all the details, such as Mom's abandonment when I was 12, her loss of parental rights, and her refusal to pay child support. He showed the judge my proposed rent-free arrangement and the past due utility bills. But he wasn't done yet. "We have proof that Mrs. Sophia's financial situation is not bad," he added. "She claims that when her mother's head snapped up, her eyes widened in horror. Mrs. Sophia owns an apartment in another city, which my lawyer explained was left to her by a former partner. She currently earns a good living by renting it out." There was silence in the courtroom. The judge frowned severely and turned to look at Mom. "Do you think this, Mrs. Sophia?" Mom's face went white. She opened and closed her mouth multiple times before whispering, "Yes, Your Honor." The judge's voice was cold when he made his decision. "This court grants the eviction." In addition, as we were leaving the courthouse, I saw Abigail standing off to the side, looking confused. "Sophia will reimburse the landlord for the month she occupied the apartment without paying rent. Your behavior is very inappropriate, Mrs. Sophia. The matter is resolved." The gavel fell with a thunderous crash that echoed throughout the courtroom. It was done. Despite Mom's frown, I went up to her and said, "I'm sorry it came to this, Abigail. You can still get in touch with me if you ever need actual assistance, okay?" She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears, and I said, "I apologize, Amelia. I had no idea." I smiled sadly at her, and it was okay. As I left, I felt as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. In the weeks that followed, Mom and Abigail moved out of the apartment to live on Mom's other property, according to rumors, and neither of us contacted them. As I stood in the now empty apartment, I allowed the memories of the previous few months to fill my head. Underneath the tension of the legal dispute, the pain of Mom's treachery, and the happiness I had experienced upon her return, I felt a new sense of freedom for the first time in years. I could finally move on.